All right, we are live. I want to start with one of my favorite quotes. I have a lot of them, but this one, and I don't know who attribute it to. So if you know who first said this, let me know. I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments. But we can only know others as deeply as we know ourselves. And I read, I think that maybe Socrates said this first. Maybe Matt Kahn has also said it. But I'm going to come back to that in a moment here and what that means. But think about that for a moment. We can only know others as deeply as we know ourselves. All right, diving in here. My name is Amy Miller, and during today's Empower Hour, we're going to talk about how self and social awareness influence leadership abilities, including communication and fostering a connection, and ultimately, of course, what we want driving results. A little bit about my background. I'm a corporate coach and recruiter, and some of the topics that I'm super passionate about are inspiring motivation and effective communication, because with unclear communication, this leads to disconnect, which is part of what we'll talk about today. So really excited to dive into this topic here. And as the video is live, if you're watching live and you have a question, feel free to drop it into the comments, and then I'll circle back to that, to any questions at the end. And then also, if you're watching the replay and you have a question, drop it into the comments, and I'll circle back there as well. So talking about emotional intelligence, before I ever started formally studying emotional intelligence, I was already employing a lot of the concepts that we will talk about today. I was just doing this intuitively. And these, some of the tools that we'll talk about helped me ultimately overcome my biggest challenge in my life. Of course, life isn't over yet, but I'm still confident that I've already overcome my biggest challenge. And how I did it was by employing some of the concepts that we'll talk about today. And these same concepts are going to help elevate your self-awareness, which the more you elevate your self-awareness, then the more you naturally elevate your social awareness. Because, coming back to the quote, we can't know others beyond the depth that we know ourselves. And so what are some of these concepts that can help elevate yourself and social awareness? Curiosity and reflection. And by better understanding your emotions, then you can better regulate them. So emotional regulation as well. And that's important, of course, in leadership, again, whether you're leading a team or if you are leading of your own life. But these concepts ultimately became the foundation for my personal transformation. I continued to accelerate on my career path once I finally got through the struggle of getting it started. But personally, I still was struggling with this big challenge. And ultimately, the transformation came through implementing some of the concepts that we'll talk about today. And then the concepts are also the framework of my coaching program. So pretty exciting. It's been exciting for me to see that the more I further my research, the more I learned that a lot of the concepts I was already implementing in my own life and in my coaching program are backed by research. And so, of course, we'll talk about some of what the research says today about these concepts and leadership as well. And when I was, just another quick note, and then we'll dive in here. But when I was pursuing my master's program in industrial and organizational psychology, they had us complete several leadership assessments. And so one was on emotional intelligence. And I was not surprised. My scores were super high. And this is not to pat myself on the back here, just to say that I think it would be really challenging to speak to and teach something that you don't know. And with emotional intelligence, that's something that you have and or you can build. And if you're not already embodying it, you're probably not quite equipped to teach on it. But my scores were super high in all four of the verticals. I think 2 were 100s and 2 were maybe 98s. And I used to wonder years ago whether self and social awareness was something that you just innately had, or whether it could be taught. And I now believe that it's absolutely something that can be taught, and through some of the concepts that we'll talk about today. And the research also says the same, that you can teach and you can learn self and social awareness. And it's actually, the research says it's both. It's an innate, inherent trait, and then it's also something that can be learned. So if you are looking to elevate yourself and social awareness and it sounds or feels daunting, take some pressure off, because it's not as challenging. Well, it is challenging, but it's super simple and it can be learned. And also, if you're a leader and you see some self and social awareness opportunities on your team to help elevate self and social awareness, then stay tuned in, because we're going to talk about how you can do that. All right, so let's get a little bit deeper into self and social awareness, and it starts with identifying your emotions. And again, back to the quote, we can only know others as deeply as we know ourselves. Well, if you understand yourself on a deeper level, for example, you understand how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way, why you are reacting versus responding, why you maybe showed up in a way that you're not super proud of, well, then you can do something about it. And so this is going to elevate your confidence, and ultimately it's going to elevate your performance, and you're going to continue improving. If you're not aware of the challenge, and if you're not aware of the reason of how you're showing up and the result that is yielding, well, then you're unlikely to make any changes there. And if you are not aware of these, your own personal challenges, your own personal strengths, your emotions, and why you feel the way you do, well, how can you better understand? How can you understand these things in others? I mean, you really can't. And so, elevating your social awareness it starts with elevating your self-awareness. And so first, let's define self and social awareness. And this is also one of the challenges in the research on emotional intelligence, is that oftentimes the definition of self-awareness and social awareness can vary quite a bit. But for the purpose of our conversation today, I'll go ahead and define. So self-awareness is the ability to understand and accurately even label your emotions. And this definition used the word trigger. Maybe we don't like the word trigger because we want to be able to regulate our emotions. So maybe it doesn't feel so good to say that, to acknowledge when something triggers us. So we can maybe say what stimulates that emotion. But social awareness or self-awareness is the ability to recognize your emotions, how you're feeling and why you're feeling the way that you are, and also your motivations, what you want and why you want it. So if you can't understand these things about yourself, you're not going to be able to better to identify with and understand others. And so social awareness is just that. It's the capacity to read others' emotions, energy, to understand their needs, and to be able to respond appropriately, to understand, how you're showing up and how you're being received or not received. So this is how we define self-awareness and social awareness. And just with the definitions alone, you can see why this is important, why emotional intelligence is important. And it's a trait that employers want. And it's also a trait that we want in leaders. And the research shows that leaders that have that are open and comfortable being vulnerable, and have a higher level of self and social awareness, also have more resilience, and they're leading teams that are more resilient. And we'll get deeper into that in just a moment here. But I want to talk a little bit more about, or just remind everybody, that emotions are data. A lot of times we don't want to deal with those uncomfortable emotions because they don't feel good. And especially when we're busy with our jobs. And if you're a leader leading a team, you're being pulled in many different directions, and likely things are always changing. So you're likely in a dynamic role. Your company, your industry, things may often be changing. So there's a lot of stress there. And so sometimes those uncomfortable emotions, those frustrations, can feel like a distraction. But emotions are data. So if we can learn to work to shift our perspective around those our unpleasant emotions and invite them in as data. We like data, right? Data is information. It is useful information, and that's what your emotions are. So they are signaling you on what you need to pay attention to. So whatever is getting your attention, give it your attention, and you're ultimately going to save time in doing so. I can think of a time where I was feeling super frustrated with a work situation, and I had been very frustrated for a while. I didn't realize how long until I stopped and just let myself really sit and be in that discomfort, that uncomfortable emotion. And once I did, what I did was I got curious about why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. So first I identified the emotion, and then I got curious about where it was coming from and why I felt the way that I did. And with that, I was able to very quickly get to the root cause And then I realized of why I felt the way that I was feeling. And then I realized, oh my goodness, I've been feeling like this for years. And in that whole process was probably about 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes. And then from there, I knew my next direction. I knew my solution. I had it in just a moment. But when we're not paying attention to our emotions, the data that's trying to get our attention, we can't figure out the solution. I'm sure that you all are familiar with the book, The Obstacle is the Way. I have to be honest, I haven't read the whole book. I have it. I started reading it. It wasn't really my thing, but I like the title, The Obstacle is the Way. And I feel like it says it all right there, because the solution, the opportunity, well, that's on the other side of the problem. And the problem is getting your attention to draw you in the direction of what needs to be overcome, or the direction that you need to go in. So that's the way. But when we're ignoring our uncomfortable emotions, we're neglecting not only the data that's useful in making our decisions, but we're neglecting ourselves. We're not acknowledging and not accepting ourselves. And so by ignoring our emotions, you're not as self-aware as you could be. So then how do you elevate your self-awareness? Well, you start by paying attention to your emotions. And when we're not paying attention to our emotions, this can lead to anxiety. And even ultimately depression. This is how we get out of alignment with where we're supposed to be, because your emotions are showing up to guide your direction. And when you're ignoring your emotions, well, you're ignoring yourself and you're not accepting yourself. So this is why you always want to acknowledge, even label the emotion, get curious about why it's there, and ultimately accept however you're feeling. Because when you don't do that, you're not accepting yourself. And there's no way to foster social awareness and connection without showing up as yourself. And in order to do that, you have to first accept yourself. And probably getting a little bit too deep here for this conversation. But this is really important stuff. And once you adopt and start to embody these practices and try it and ultimately make it a habit of listening to your emotions, paying them some attention, you're going to really elevate your self-awareness, understand yourself so much better. And this is the process. This is how you do it. So isn't that easy and encouraging? And why does it matter? Because the better you understand yourself, the better you can understand others, and then the better you're going to connect with others. And who do we work harder for? People that accept us, that receive us, that understand us. So leaders that are high in self and social awareness, and also vulnerability. There's a really great article in Harvard Business Review about vulnerability in leaders. I forget offhand the title, but I did link it in the description, so you can check that out if you like. But the research that article talks about is that vulnerability in leadership is not a weakness, it's connection. And it talks about how the best leaders are themselves. They share intentionally to build to create an atmosphere of openness, and that this can then help foster creativity and innovation on teams. Because if the leader is not comfortable in being themselves and sharing how they're feeling, well, somebody on your team might come to you with a problem, but they may not feel confident coming to you with a solution, because what if it's not the right solution? But this is how just sort of brainstorming. Sometimes the first solution, the first idea is not always a solution, but it gets the brain stimulated, and then you start thinking of the other more and more solutions. So you want this kind of openness and creativity on your team to foster innovation. And what happens when we are not, just real quick back to ignoring our emotions, when we're not honoring and accepting our emotions? Let's say you're moving forward with something that doesn't feel right to you. Well, this is what's called cognitive dissonance. And you're getting further and further away from your instincts, your intuition. And not to say that we want to base all of our decisions on our instincts, but you want to let your intuition guide your direction. If you're going against your intuition, which is innate, it is designed to keep you safe, to keep you protected. Well, wouldn't it also make sense that your instincts are showing up to help you in your professional life, to help you in the hiring process? Again, not saying that we want to rely solely on our gut, but there is definitely a place for your intuition in leadership, in the hiring process, and absolutely in your life to help guide your direction. But you can't hear your intuition as long as you're ignoring your emotions, because this is how your intuition speaks to you, through your emotions. All right. So just a little exercise for you to do, right now as you're listening to the video, or you can jot it down and come back to it later. But think about an emotion that you felt today. And our emotions are always changing. So it could be what you're feeling right now, it could be an emotion that you felt earlier in the day. And then think about, first label it, make sure that it was actually an emotion. For example, tired is a way that we can feel, but that's not actually an emotion. So maybe you feel drained, maybe you feel depleted, maybe you feel frustrated. So dig for the actual emotion and then label it, and then get curious about what stimulated that emotion. This is the process of elevating your self-awareness, learning about yourself. And what is the point of that? Well, then you can take it a step further and you can do an after action review. Before I had even heard of after action reviews, I developed one of my coaching concepts, which I call observe and choose. And I remember about 25 years ago, this was probably my first that I can recall after action review, where I somehow instinctively, for the first time, it was a little delayed, I was having a bad experience. And I suddenly realized how I was showing up in that moment, how I was acting, and I didn't like it. And what I did was I felt like I was taking a step outside of myself and observing my actions. And then from there, what I did is I got curious about where that behavior came from. What was it that I was feeling that drove that behavior? And what other situations in my life had that emotion shown up? And this led to me uncovering why I was acting the way that I was. And it was a way that I often acted, and it was a way that I wanted to change. So this is what I call observe and choose. You can observe how you're feeling, and you can observe through an after action review how you showed up, how you responded, how you reacted, whether it was positive or negative in that moment. And then if the action did not create the desired outcome, guess what? Now you can choose something different because you're aware of yourself. But without this awareness, there's not going to be the growth there. And so why this is uncomfortable is because a lot of times we want to blame something outside of ourselves, put the reason for the outcome on something outside of ourselves. But in doing that, we disempower ourselves, because think about it. If we are waiting for somebody to show up and give us an opportunity, if we're waiting for our circumstances to change outside of ourselves, we're going to be waiting a long time. But there's so much power in looking within and reminding yourself to take responsibility, and that to focus on just what you can control. And you can control yourself. You can control how you show up, how you respond, how you react, but not first without acknowledging what the action that's leading to the undesired outcome. And more importantly, the emotion behind it. So observe your emotion. That's step number one. Often the first step in a lot of the concepts that I talk about. But in this video, the purpose is observing your emotions is going to help you understand them. You can't understand yourself if you don't take the time to get curious about why you're feeling the way that you are feeling. So observe your emotions, and then moving forward and observe your reactions. You can reflect, and then you can choose something different moving forward. So there's so much power in that. And, once you do it the first time, so what I had to do is I had to train myself. I observed what I was doing, that I no longer wanted to be that way. So what's the new action that you can take? And I still felt compelled to go back to my old pattern, but I would just remind myself to choose something different. And I just did that over and over and over until ultimately I changed. And so, yes, the growth, of course, it's all about growth and improving, and it is possible. And improving is persevering, and that's really powerful. All right. So let's tie back again, the conversation back to leadership and decision making. And I was reading an article. Of course, there's a lot of research out there on rational decision making. So this is gathering data, gathering information versus intuitive decision making. And so which is better? There's still a lot of debate on that. But this one article, the research found that leaders that have the strongest, that are leading stronger teams that are performing better, they're using both rational decision making combined with intuitive decision making. So what does that mean? Well, your intuition is your gut. It's a feeling, and So you can lead with your gut, and or you can research and collect more information and more data and more data and more data. But this article was talking about in dynamic situations. So maybe you're in an industry or a company or a situation where things are consistently changing. Well, by the time you gather all of the data, which by the way, there's always more to get, so we'll never gather all of it, but there's a certain point where the situation, where if you take enough time to gather more and more and more data, the situation is going to change. And then the information that you've gathered is now irrelevant. So you want to use both. And the research found that if leaders that are using both intuitive and making decisions based off of both rational data gathering and intuition, they're making the stronger decisions, leading to better performing teams. And you can't honor your intuition without listening to yourself and paying attention to your emotions. So just wanted to tie that into the research there. And that article, if you want to check it out, is also linked below. It's called Complementary Effects of Intuition on Strategic Decision Making. So I thought that was pretty cool. And oftentimes, in working with leaders over the past 10 years and recruiting, when leaders reach out to me to backfill a role, maybe they made a bad hire where the new hire didn't stay beyond a year, I always ask them, were there any signs during the interview process? And I want to say always, or almost always, for sure, almost always, maybe always, there was a sign, there was a hesitation, there was a pause, there was something in their gut, their intuition that let the hiring manager know, I'm not sure, I don't think that this is the right candidate. But they moved forward anyway with that candidate, thinking, well, I can coach them up. Well, the other members of my leadership team think that they're strong. Well, I need to hire quickly. So this is an example of leading with fear versus intuition. Well, we need to get boots on the ground. We need to make this hire. The position's been open for a long time. And this is where you want to take some more time and you can think of, it could be it could be a hiring experience example, it could be another example, but think of a time where something in your gut told you that this is not the right direction to keep moving forward with, but you went ahead in that direction anyway. And what was the result? So then you can do another after action review and take responsibility, and not to beat yourself up, but to just create that awareness so that you can make a different decision moving forward. And if it's back to the hiring example, well, identify the emotion that you're feeling, what's behind the resistance with that candidate, and then what information do you need? You don't have to make your decision fully based off of your instinct, but then from there, let the instinct guide your direction. What additional piece of information do you need to disprove the concern, the hesitation, or to prove it? And then you can go and go further from there. You can figure out the next step from there. But by ignoring our intuition, we miss out on that next step. And we often find ourselves in uncomfortable situations when we're ignoring our intuition. And touching a little bit more on vulnerability and what this means, and as a leader. And again, if you're leading your own life, it applies as well, whether you're leading a team or not. But remember, self-awareness, this is going to build your confidence. Okay. And because you're aware of yourself, you're aware of your motives, you're aware of what's holding you back. And then you can become aware of how to overcome the challenge. You're aware of what you want and why you want it. Well, then you can feel more motivated to move in that direction. So it's going to elevate your confidence to get better connected with yourself. And then to show up as yourself, to present to others as yourself. Well, this requires vulnerability, because in being yourself, not everybody's going to like you or everything about you. And sometimes people and situations and jobs that are going to fall away because you're showing up as yourself. And that's not maybe the people and opportunities that don't align are going to fall away. So this is why it requires vulnerability, to show that, you're human. But that's the only way that you can foster that social awareness, by letting others see you. And so the self-awareness is going to build confidence, and the social awareness is going to build connection. And this is something I've been talking a lot about connection in my interview coaching workshop, because as a candidate, a lot of times You might be in your head thinking about, well, what do they want to hear? What do they want me to say? What's a good question to ask? And then there's no way to make a connection because you're not actually present. You're not paying attention to you, to your emotions, to what's important to you. And so this is why it's important to build your self-awareness, to then build that social awareness, increase your social awareness, and then and that requires vulnerability. But this is how you're going to have connection. And this is also, we need this connection. Research in organizational psychology shows we need the connection to meaningful work in order to feel satisfied in our roles. And part of that is being connected to our teams. And we can't be connected to others without first being connected to ourselves. So I'm kind of repeating myself a lot now, but I hope that what I've shared makes sense. And so if you have any questions and you are listening, drop them in the chat. And then if you're watching the replay, any questions that you have, I'll drop them in the comments and I'll circle back there. All right, so real quick, what are some takeaways that you can do to start today actively working to elevate your self-awareness? Sit with the discomfort and also just feel your feelings. Sometimes it's going to be discomfort, but instead of reaching for something to feel better, like calling that friend or that a family member or that coworker that you know will feel your pain, will validate your story and your feelings. Instead, just sit with it and get curious about yourself and why you're feeling the way that you are, because this is ultimately going to lead you to your next step. It's going to help you uncover the core issue. And if you can do that for yourself as a leader, you can better do that for your team. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to point out, well, this is the problem, this is the solution, but you can maybe help guide, help direct, help draw the challenges and the goals out of your team members through conversation. But it doesn't happen without first understanding. And research also shows that leaders that are higher in emotional intelligence are more resilient. And so that's just a note of encouragement. That's a positive sounding word, positive feeling word, resilience. This is something that we want in our workplace because things are going to be often changing. So pay attention to your emotions, and you can start with a daily morning practice. I do this every morning as part of my mindfulness meditation practices. I identify 2 emotions that I'm feeling, and sometimes it maybe takes a moment because you want to make sure that it is an emotion and that you can actually label it. And then you can get curious. You can do your after action reviews. You can pay attention to take yourself through the emotion, what's behind it, why it's showing up, and what action that emotion drove and what was the outcome. And if it was a not so great outcome, well, what can you shift moving forward? You can observe and you can choose something different. And there's great power in that. And this is something that you can implement with your team as well, either one-on-one or in a team building exercise. And if you're curious about maybe doing a team building exercise together, maybe a tailored workshop for your team, maybe on self and social awareness, emotional intelligence, or something else that would be useful, you are welcome to reach out. And I think that is it for this one. You're also welcome to connect with me if you're curious about coaching. The link is in the description. And I'm planning on doing the Empower Hour topic discussions every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And so I'll do my best to send out the invites. It does get to be kind of a lot to keep up with. So you should be able to, if you can follow on or subscribe on YouTube, you'll get the announcement there. I'll post it on LinkedIn as well. And if you'd like a personal invite, then you're welcome to reach out and I can make sure that you get one. Thanks for watching. If you got some value, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.